Okay, excellent. Yes, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Sunday question. We call it question because we're interested in individual raising their question pertaining to their own situation. And if the question is too detailed, we will just take part of that question and then connect with you separately in order to get further information. This is quite new for us. We're working closely with other partners. So we have our regular Sunday chat, which is twice a month with Justice for Windrush Generation. And this chat is very much focused on getting individual question, because sometime on the Sunday chat, people may not feel that they want to raise question, from their own situation. So this gives you the opportunity to do so. And the idea of these sessions is that when you register initially, you would put your question in the registration, and then we will know what question you're raising. But there's also the opportunity to raise question during our session. Let me just say initially that the information that we will give you is based on the information that is current. We say current out there in the public domain. So in a moment, I will introduce our advocate, Tanika Stevenson, who will just explain a little bit about the work she does and what is an advocate. So just to say that the information that we'll present to you, or the information that we'll discuss, is based on a number of things. It's based on current immigration information. It could be based on case law that we're familiar with. And it may not even be based on anything, because we may not know the answer, and we may need to, to find out the answer. But we'll see how we get on. So just to give you a little bit of background, the idea of this session is really to try and understand not just Windrush, but the legislation that surround Windrush. In other words, the various immigration pieces of legislation that affect Windrush claimants. And immigration is quite a complex thing in terms of the various statutes, etc. We know that particular pieces of legislation has impacted on Windrush in 1971, 1973. But there's also other things that we need to explore. And so we're sort of picking up from the 1948 Act coming through right up to the current. That's broadly the sort of timeline in the immigration acts and statute. And so you would have posed your question in advance, and you would want answers to those questions pertaining to your situation, and we hope we'll be able to help you with that. If we're not able to give you all the answers, then we might be able to do some additional research in order to get that answer back to you, and we'll do the best we can. At this stage, we can also mention that we have got professional partners that we can consult with in order to get a definitive answer to your question. So I hope that helped as a way of introduction to the session. It's nice to know who's on the call, and if everyone are currently in the UK. If there are people outside the UK, then welcome, and please let us know in the chat that you're outside the UK, which particular country of the world you're located in. That's helpful. By joining the Eventbrite, you would have seen all the dates, forthcoming dates of these sessions. So you can then share that information with other people so that they can join the session at their own convenient time, etc. Okay, I think that is the introduction. So for the moment, I'm going to ask Tanika to just introduce herself, and it will be helpful to know the role of an advocate in relation to how an advocate can assist an individual in a claim or in answering a particular question relating to Windrush or relating to immigration, because not everything is Windrush. There are things that fall outside of Windrush. As we've said, the period that we're talking about is 48 up to 89. That's the Windrush timeline. But there will be questions outside of that. People want to know that may affect 1991, 2000, etc. So I'll just pause for a moment and just invite Tanika to just introduce herself and say a little bit about the role of as an advocate, and then we will then go into the questions.
Please, thank you, Garrick. Yeah, thank you, Garrick. As Garrick said, my name is Tanika Stevenson, and I am a Windrush advocate. What I do, there are different types of advocates or different capacities in which advocates operate. The capacity in which I operate is one where I assist clients by performing triage, i.e. determining whether they have a claim under the Windrush scheme or not. If they don't, if it falls under general immigration rules, I am able to provide them with that information because I work with solicitors whose solicitors certificate I can give immigration advice under. And providing that I understand the remit it falls under, I will either say that this is where it falls, or I'll refer them to the solicitors to get further help. Having said that, if it does fall under the Windrush schemes, be it the status rectification or compensation, I would help that person or persons to determine exactly how it applies to them. And to do that, you first have to understand whether or which part of the scheme they fall under, which eligibility, and go from there. See which heads of claims they were affected by. Unfortunately, when you do get to the bottom of people's stories, I'm not saying that lightly. Unfortunately, one of the problems or barriers that we encounter regularly is the evidential burden, being able to prove whatever it is that it would have suffered. And another thing that, as an advocate, we have to help people understand that Windrush schemes do not cover or do not take into consideration discrimination nor racism under the heads of claim. So, for example, if you were refused housing or employment because of your ethnicity or race, or the color of your skin, or because somebody just didn't like the way you spoke, that is not covered under the Windrush schemes. Unfortunately, we as advocates, we have to be able to explain that in such a way that every client understands. So that's primarily what an advocate does, along with other stuff. What was your second question, Garrick, that you wanted me to address?
You've addressed the meaning of advocate, but also can you just say something about law, please, in terms of the organization that's organizing these events?
Sure. Law, we've been Garrick and I are co-founders of Law, Liverpool Advocates for Windrush, and been we've recently created it because we found that it's needed in the city that we live, i.e., Liverpool. Not a lot of people have come forward to make their claims. We've both been working in the Windrush space for a few years, myself 2019. Garrick, when did you start?
Right at the outset of the scandal.
2018.
Yeah.
Okay, I started in 2019. And over the years, we've seen changes to policies, the schemes, how it's impacted people within our communities. And we, as individuals, thought, what can we do? So, on a volunteer basis, we took up the mantle and tried to fight for our community, members of our community's rights. Law, like I said, we recently formed in Liverpool because as individuals doing our own thing, Garrick is a campaigner. I am more into law aspect of things. I am studying and training in the legal field. I am not yet a legal practitioner. So my interest in that is how can I use my knowledge so far to help people who may have less of a understanding of the schemes. Somebody who's legally trained to some degree, I still found that the schemes and policies were difficult to comprehend, and others found the same. So if we find it who have some legal appetite, much less people who are don't have any or aren't able to read or unable to digest legal jargons or concepts as a form may entail or have. Um, so what law aims to do that's different from all the other groups that are out there is not only to help people with their applications and claim compensation or rectify their immigration status, but also to give support if people want to speak to someone confidentially about the effect this ordeal has had on them. We do have someone that they can speak to, a counselor. If they prefer to pay for that service, there's that option too. But we offer everything at law for free. I am a researcher. Well, I am a PhD candidate. I'm doing my doctorate and also I'm training to be a barrister. And one of the things the law will be doing also is seeing how we can influence policy and legislation to support claimants. I was going to say victims, but victims is sort of derogatory, so I try to refrain myself, so apologies for that. My apology, 1 second. My apologies for that. I shall put my phone on mute. Yes, so that is essentially what law hopes to do, but also be a hub for people both nationally and internationally. That if you want something, you could come to us. We may not know the answers, as Garrick said earlier, but we'll be able to signpost you or say, well, maybe this is what you could do. Again, unfortunately, legal aid is not available within the UK. And a lot of times when people come to us, we find that Windrush cases lend themselves nicely to immigration issues. In order to get consultation with a solicitor or a barrister, if you do direct access to barristers, then you have to pay the consultation fee. Coming to us eliminates that. You get free advice in as much as we can give legal advice. If not, we just merely signpost you to someone who we think or know may be able to help you with your case, whatever specific aspect of your case you need help with, which saves you a lot of time. So we're trying to get from the community how we can most effectively serve you. Hence, we decided to come up with a question and answer session on Windrush. We can assume what it is you want to know, but we don't really know because this is your life. So hence, we're asking you to supply us with questions, something as simple like, what is Windrush? What is really Windrush about? Or what is the hostile environment? Why do they call it a hostile environment? Or as Garrick explained earlier, the different legislations that came into place and why, for example, or just to have the conversation. what we found is that a lot of people in the community do not understand, as much as they're claiming, what the Windrush schemes are about, nor specifically what the heads of claims for compensation are about. And this is reflected in the forms that they fill out, the rejection letter they receive from the Home Office, which at that stage, most of the times, then is when it comes to us. And had they understood, it's our belief that those forms would have been filled out better or differently, if not better. So we're hoping to have this open, safe space conversation. We're not working for the Home Office. We're independent. We are just individuals who want to share information with each other. And please feel free to ask anything that you have. Karika, hand back to you.
Thanks for that, Tanika. If I can just add a couple of things to what Tanika have said. She's a little bit modest, but she is going through her bar exams, etc., etc. So she has got a first class honors degree in law, and she did say that she is a PhD student involved in research. And that's quite important because that does allow Tanika to actually connect with other partners across the country. And again, this is good for information and sharing. And that's another benefit of this platform, that we have a much wider connection across the country with different organization and different specialism. So that's helpful for us. Tanika just raised one point, and I'd like to just ask a question myself, and a rhetorical question, but I think the first thing that we need to establish, do we all know what is Windrush? It seems a strange question to ask, what is Windrush? But how do we explain? How do we explain that? You know, what is Windrush? There's a lot of information out there about Windrush. Some of it is not accurate. And that's another point that we're going to try and make sure that we address the inaccuracy that exists out there, and try to correct it. And we do this in a number of ways. There's certain statement that's been made. Certain reporters and newspapers have reported certain things, and they've done it from their perspective, and some often it is incorrect, and we need to know why it's incorrect. Sometimes it's just racist the way that they report things, so we have to challenge these things. And so I asked a question: how would you answer that question as what is Windrush? See, I think it's important to actually get a sense of that, because that's really the sort of foundation, to move on, understanding what is Windrush. Now, in the public domain, there is information recorded about Windrush. And when you ask that question, if you was to put it into a Google search and ask what is Windrush, you will get a couple of pages coming up. And the first thing that will come up is the Empire Windrush ship 1948. That's the first thing that will come up to try and explain what is Windrush. But in the public domain, and in particularly around the BBC and other press, when they referred to Windrush and referred to the ship, the Windrush, HMS Windrush Empire, they give a different narrative to the truth. And let me explain what I mean by a different narrative. So the ship arrived in Tilbury in 1948 in June. and we accepted the date as June 22nd, and so that became the Windrush Day celebration. But in reality, the ship arrived on the 21st, and the people couldn't get off the ship. There were lots of political issues going on in the government, so they stayed overnight on the ship. That's why the date 22nd is the date used. Also, when describing the people on the ship or the passengers on the ship, they often just refer to the Jamaicans on the ship. And you will see old photographs of Jamaicans coming off the ship. And they often say in their reports, 500 Jamaicans. And so that is how Windrush is presented to the people. 500 Jamaicans coming on this Windrush ship. But the reality is that is wrong. That's not correct. The Windrush ship passengers was 1,027. And it was more than just Jamaicans on the ship. So we need to, to be able to understand you had people from Trinidad, from St. Lucia, from Grenada, from Barbados. We had Polish people. We need to understand that the narrative that the British press would put out is just 500 Black people coming from Jamaica on this ship. Okay? And you would think what sit behind all of this is that the British people, they'll just focus on the 500 Jamaicans. And so Jamaicans end up with a reputation. Okay? So that's the first thing we need to correct, right? The numbers on the ship and also where the ship came from and the different passengers on the ship. So that is Windrush. However, the next thing that we need to understand, and we keep on emphasizing this, nowhere in that document press statement does the country or the politicians or the reporters talk about Commonwealth, talk about people from other places. Yeah? It was much later when we challenged the Home Office about this that they include Commonwealth, but they were quite happy to just focus on the Jamaicans or the Caribbean. And no doubt that is why so many people believe that the Windrush scandal, as they said, is a Caribbean thing. A lot of Africans didn't know that it involved them until we started to explain that Windrush is global and Windrush includes all the Commonwealth countries. So that's a narrative that we should continue to express, let people know Windrush is global and it is not restricted to the Caribbean. Once we establish that, we get a better understanding about Windrush. So that's the first point from me. Now,
Gareth, on that point, can I read out the list of countries that the
yes,
Home
I
Office?
was just going to say, just to give you an idea that Windrush is not restricted Caribbean. We're just going to tell you the countries where people have made application to Windrush, including, and I won't comment until we get all the names. Go on, Tanika, please.
Okay, and Anguilla,
Yep.
Antigua and Barbuda, Australia, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belize, Bermuda, Botswana, British Antarctic Territory, British Indian Ocean Territory, Brunei, Canada, Cayman Islands, St. Lucia, Samoa, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Solomon Islands, South Africa, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, Sri Lanka, Cyprus, excluding the sovereign base areas, Dominica, Falkland Islands, Fiji, Ghana, Gibraltar, Grenada, Guyana, Hong Kong, India, Jamaica, Kenya, Kiribati, Lesotho, Malawi, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Swaziland, Tanzania, the Bahamas, the Gambia, Tonga, Trinidad and Tobago, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Mauritius, Montserrat, Nambia, Nauru, New Zealand, Nigeria, Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, Pitcairn, Henderson, Dose, and Ono Islands, St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha, Turks and Caicos Islands, Tuvalu, Uganda, Vanuatu, Virgin Islands, Zambia, and Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, you see, now it's important in order to understand the Commonwealth. And so, when we talk about Windrush being global, and we talk about the Commonwealth nation, and we talk about the British Empire, we understand that the British Empire and the Commonwealth is much bigger than that location of just the Caribbean. Okay? And yet, no effort has been made by the Home Office to reach out to these countries, these islands, to get information out to these people. So a lot of people have no idea that Windrush is part of their history and their experience. No idea at all. Okay? So we're trying to address that misinformation that's out there, and trying to focus just on the the limited Black countries, and though this is the Black issue. Yeah, they never talk about white South Africa or Canada or New Zealand. They never talk about that. Yeah, because it's white. You mainly focus on the Black country. So I hope that helped a little bit, just to understand. So when you're explaining to people about Windrush, what Windrush is, and who make up, the Windrush population, as it were, you're able to tell them. Okay? Now, it is true that when Britain left Brexit, country, the Windrush that when you look at the list, the fact sheet produced by the Home Office, you will see the application numbers from each country, and you will see there mentioned EU. Okay, so EU was able to apply to the scheme to rectify their status, having changed from Brexit. Britain is no longer part of the EU. So again, it's good to understand that how the European benefit from the Windrush scheme. Okay, so I'll pause there just to let that digest a little bit. What I'm interested in now is really to start taking questions that were sent in when you register. And I don't know in what order we're going to do this, Tanika.
Yeah.
How, in terms of how the question came in, or how random we're going to choose the question.
Well, I have a list of questions.
Okay.
So nobody had sent in questions, but these are questions that I wanted, I guess, for clarifications, and I would like, to have a better understanding of, and it's open for discussion. So Garrick and I, just for reiteration purposes, we're giving you from what we understand it as. If you have a different interpretation, then please feel free to come on mic or in the text and engage with us. So we've already answered, or Garrick has, what is Windrush? Next question is, what is the hostile environment? What is a hostile environment? You hear the term being used. Why that specific term and no other? Why not rectification of Commonwealth citizen status and compensating them for any harm they incurred as a result of these unfair legislations that had been imposed or something to that effect? Why hostile environment? Garrick?
It's a good question because recently we had a change of understanding about hostile environment. And what we need to try and understand, when did it start? So we need a start date for hostile environment. And by whom? Okay?
Those are good questions.
And you know, we were always thinking that the hostile environment existed because I lived in South London, Brixton during the 70s and 80s, and I saw the riots, etc. And I saw how police were literally targeting black people under what was known as the sus laws. So people couldn't walk the street without being stopped and searched and also beaten up. That was just common. I also can tell you that I saw vans with slogan about niggers go home while I lived in South London. And one would think then, oh, that's been the hostile environment from the 70s. Yeah, oh, that's a thought. And then we might even think, well, no, not 70s, maybe it is 80s. See, oh, that's another thought. All right. Some might even say, well, it's long before that. My own experience, they will say, when I came here in the 50s, when the Teddy Boys and they were chasing people in Northwest London, etc., they probably say, oh, that was my experience. It was hostile to us then. Right? So the question about the hostile environment, what it is, and when did it start, is a good question for us to understand, because it does have a bearing on Windrush specifically.
Yes, it does.
So where does the word hostile environment came from? Who actually said it, and when did they say it? Let me just pose that for a moment. Any comments, any thoughts from anyone in the audience?
I'm gonna pick on two persons, or I would like to pick on two persons. Please do not feel bullied in any way, guys. Me saying I'm gonna pick on you, or I should use a better word, I'll call on you for support. So I'm gonna call on Roland Hussein. He is also a Windrush campaigner and a claimant to the Windrush schemes. For people who may or may not know him, he's been in the papers a lot. He also is the co-founder with Garrick and some others, I believe, of Windrush Justice. So, Roland, can I get you to come in here and possibly help us with an answer? Okay, Roland doesn't seem to be next to
might
his
have stepped away
phone.
from the mic
Yes.
at the moment.
The next
Okay.
person I would like to ask is Yuan. Can you help us with an answer, please? These people I know personally, by the way, audience, hence I am asking them for an answer. Hi, Yuan. We can't hear you.
He's unmuted, but I don't see any I can't see the mic moving. So
Same.
oh,
Can you?
Yes, we can hear you now, Yuan.
Okay, sorry, I was having some audio issues between the headset and the computer. Oh yeah, by the way, I feel picked on.
Oh, that was the
In a
intention. You're
nice way.
welcome.
In a nice way. Yeah.
UN, before you do answer, can you please give people a little background about yourself, just so that the audience know you, why I'm quote unquote picking on you as a friend?
Okay, so I
Thank
am Ewan Herbert. I am a victim of the Windrush scandal, although not directly, indirectly through the generational descent. I'm from St. Kitts and Nevis. So was my grandfather who came here in the 50s. And I've been in the UK consistently for the past 20 years. And I've had massive issues with the Home Office regarding British nationality law and have been campaigning before the scandal since about 2013 when the vans were, Theresa May put out the vans, and recently been campaigning for changes to nationality legislation, which we got some changes last year via the Borders
Racial
and
Borders
Nationality
Bill.
Act.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we got those changes, but still have issues. But to answer your question, I recently got a copy of uh, a report that was commissioned by the Home Office into the origins of the Windrush scandal, a report which the Home Office refuses to release to the public. And my understanding is that the hostile environment goes back roughly about 100 years to what I can remember from the top of my head, merchant sailors who came over from, I think it was Hong Kong, to assist the British Merchant Navy during World War One, and then they were deported from Britain after they've integrated themselves in Liverpool, had families there, and assisted the Royal Navy and kept Britain fed. They were systematically rounded up and deported back to Hong Kong, and families were left devastated and didn't understand or know what happened to their loved ones. So I would say that the hostile environment is roughly about 100 years old. I can't remember who initiated it back then, but it's in the report, which I have a copy and I'm happy to give to anyone who needs a copy.
Thank you for that, Ewan. Thanks for that. And
Thank you.
so let's just note what's been said. You said roughly 100 years. So we'll stay with that for the moment. Okay. Can I ask Roland, are you there?
He's probably cooking.
Okay. So 100 years is a starting point. Okay. So is there any other comments in relation to the hostile environment start date, when it started?
Can I ask Tyler to comment on that, Gareth?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Tyler?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, Tyler.
I just wanted to observe, if I'm honest. I'm not feeling that great.
Okay, that's
Okay.
so in terms of we've got a starting point of 100 years ago. So is there any other dates that we can say yes? Okay.
Yeah,
think
I would like to put forward something, Gareth, if I
Tyler,
may.
what date would you give? So let's just ask for Tyler to give us a date. What date would you link the hostile environments starting?
In terms of hostile environment, I probably would have gone and said in and around 2014, to be
Right.
honest.
Okay, that's fine. Pause at that. We'll keep that 2014. Anybody else would like to tell us as to when the hostile environments start? What date roughly, the period, and then by whom is the next question.
Yeah, so I was thinking the question is a bit perhaps ambiguous because the environment has been hostile for so long. but I believe maybe you're asking about Theresa May's hostile environment. I'm not sure.
Right. Okay. So we're going to come to that because it's about how we understand the hostile environment, and we may understand it differently because of our own experience in that period of time. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right date, but because of our experience, we may understand it that way, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Roland, can I bring you in, please?
Maybe somebody should send him an unmute request.
No, but he just put his hand up and
Yeah, maybe he can't find the unmute button.
oh, okay. Let me just see.
Yeah, if you
While
unmute
Garrett,
him.
while
Okay.
Garrett does that, that was really good, and I love how the conversation is going. And there's no right or wrong answers here. The aim of this platform is to educate each other. So please don't feel as though, for example, you said that maybe he's looking for a specific answer. That's not necessarily the case. So please, like you've told me recently about the same 100 years ago, that's something new. Again, we had recently learned about the hostile environment being a different date. So there's lots and lots of dates and conceptions. Unmute me, please, Roland said. Okay. Eric Roland would like me to unmute him. You have host power. So please don't feel, like there's a right or wrong answer on this platform. That's not the case. Mr. Johnson put something in the chat too, Garrick.
Yeah. I'm just going to let me just see. Participants. Okay, Roland. Yeah. Okay. Is that better now, Roland? Can you? I've done the unmute. So, are you able to? Can you hear me? How is that, Roland? Tanika, menus. I'm having problem with some of the menus because when you press, it's not doing what it ought to do.
I got your request to unmute just now, so it's working.
Oh, okay. Okay, right. So Roland, okay. How is that, Roland?
Perhaps the question is he on a computer or on a mobile device?
Okay, let me just continue while we again another interpretation of hostile environment. And so I'm going to sort of try to give you the understanding, and it would be helpful. There's a section that JCWI, which is the Joint Council for Welfare of Immigrants, they produce a explanation of discrimination, exploitation, and hostile environment. Really interesting to read a whole lot of that. And there's a picture of the van with the sign, people to go home, etc. However, let me just give you this example. We always understood that the hostile environment, started at a particular time until recently, only the last few weeks or so, and with the publication of Theresa May memoirs, in that she addressed that issue about the hostile environment, and also regrettably using that, which of course Home Office civil servant staff continue to use, and there's nothing you can, once it's out there, you can't get it back, you see. So this is how the hostile environment explained from JCWI. Some use the term hostile environment to describe all the policies which make life difficult for migrants living in the UK, threatening them as less deserving of dignity and humanity than British citizens. More significantly is a set of policies introduced, and here's the point, introduced in 2012 by Home Secretary Theresa May, with the aim of making life unbearably difficult in the UK for those who cannot show the right paperwork, or, as said at that time, the aim is to create here in Britain a really hostile, illegal environment for illegal migrants. To achieve this, the government set out trying to cut undocumented migrants from using fundamental services, including NHS, state support, and made it illegal to work for a landlord or to rent a property. Doctors, landlords, police officers, and teachers were asked to check immigration status, and often people who look or sound foreign, notice the point, look or sound foreign, are asked to show their papers in order to rent a home or to get medical treatment. Let me pause there, because what's been said there has a direct impact on Windrush generation. Any comments?
Sorry, what was that, Garrick?
What I just mentioned there about the hostile environment had a direct impact. If we just read this again, you'll see the point. To achieve this, the government set out trying to cut undocumented migrants off from using fundamental services, including the National Health Service and state support, and made it illegal to work or for a landlord to rent them a property. Doctors, landlords, police officers, and teachers were tasked with checking immigration status, and often people who look or sound foreign were asked to show their papers in order to rent or get medical treatment. And we know that has directly affected people from the Windrush generation. Any comments on that definition as to the hostile environment explained?
Yeah, I would like to offer one. One of the things I had heard recently was that the hostile environment came about because of the European provisions of free movement of people. So when that came about, the UK joined the EU 1973 after, I'm not going to go into the history of that, but they joined in 1973, the European Union. And from that, one of the things that came out is free movement of people. So Europeans could come over to the UK and claim benefits straight away, work, and what's not. And from what I heard from somebody in a place of authority was that they wanted to reduce on the free movement of people and how easy it was that they can come and claim benefits from these countries. And this started around 2007, according to the information that we have that is also public and you can access to. Having said that, with what Garrick just read, not only did it target European citizens, but again, anybody who sounded foreign.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in this indirectly discriminated against the Windrush generation and their descendants who've been here much longer.
Yes.
I want to challenge that. I want to ask a question on that. If the
Yes.
Europeans have freedom of movement and have the right, or let me say the effective right of abode in the United Kingdom since 73, then putting up a hostile environment to target them wouldn't necessarily work because they would have the right to be here, no? Or was there something else that they had to prove in order to be in the UK?
So I believe, if I remember my EU law, a few years ago, if I remember the policy and the provisions correctly, is that they had to be in the country for about 6 months, or they had to prove that they had means of working and taking care of themselves, that they weren't going to be a burden on the state and claim welfare. Some people came over as students, didn't leave. Some people just came over as like seasonal workers. That was the explanation and definition we were given recently by.
It doesn't seem to make sense because then with that justification, then the test for them to get benefits, etc., would be, have you been in the UK for X amount of time? And if you're not in the UK for X amount of time, then you can't get benefits because if you're in the UK under a certain amount of time from a European country, then you have to support yourself. So
Exactly.
it's a bit strange that sort of justification is why I'm attacking
You
it.
remember, if I can interject, if you remember, the EU had free movement, and there were people in the EU who live in European country claiming child benefit and other benefit from the UK government, and they were entitled to that. This idea of free movement and no borders across EU. That's why we had the purple passport, as it were, gave them that right, and they didn't require come and go. They can come and go as they please. They weren't subject to immigration control because of that agreement across Europe. When Brexit, the referendum, and they left Europe, then Britain started to change, and they were then subject to immigration control. But Britain offer a lot of the EU the opportunity of getting the British status under the Windrush scheme. And that's why when you look at the figures, over 4,500 applied and got their status rectified.
Right. So I still was trying to get at the justification with the child benefits, etc. But yes, because I attended a Windrush National Organization meeting just recently, and the only burning question I had, and which I've had for a while, which I can't get a definitive answer to, is what exactly is the Windrush scheme in its definition of the whole 1948 to 1973, and then up until 1988, because we had issues with that. And I think what the Home Office is saying is that a person of any nationality can enter the scheme if they were in the UK up to or before 1988. But a Commonwealth citizen is also a person of any nationality. So the cutoff period of 1973 for Commonwealth citizens didn't really make sense. You follow me?
Yes, and Gareth, can I come back on you and
You go ahead, because there's a point I need to just come back on after you've explained that. Yeah.
Okay, Ewan, thank you for that. So I will try to attempt to answer your burning question, and please do let me know if I didn't or you still have any queries. So something that Gareth said earlier to the hostile environment. This was only made clear to us early in September about when the hostile environment started. And I think you and I had a conversation around this. We were told exclusively that it did not start when I thought originally 1948 to 1973, then going to 1988, 31st of December 1988.
Wait, sorry, the hostile environment or the Windrush?
Hostile environment. So I'm going back to something Gareth said to build my answer to answer your question. Remember Gareth earlier said that a lot of people are confused with the dates, and he was asking people what dates did they think the hostile environment started. That was my understanding up until a few weeks ago.
Oh, I was asking about the Windrush scheme definition. So
Yes, and I'm going to get onto
okay.
that because
Gotcha.
the Windrush scheme was birthed from the hostile environment. It goes hand in hand. You cannot have one and not the other in this case, unfortunately. So with my understanding, that was how I interpret the Windrush schemes to come about. That because of one we said about the EU and the free movement of people, my interpretation for all the years was it started from when the ship landed in 1948 to the period where they're providing the schemes, the 1st of January 1989. A few weeks ago, we were told that's not the case. The hostile environment started from 2007. At least that's how the Home Office is looking at it. 2007. So then I inquired, like, oh my gosh, I did not know that. I've been under the impression, as I've just stated, for all these years. I was corrected and said, no, it started from 2007. But prior to me being told that by somebody with authority to say such a thing, I had read Theresa May's memoir, clips of it from the Guardian newspaper, which supported that person's statement. And Theresa May, the ex-prime minister, said the hostile environment started in 2007. It started originally about 2000 through successive legislations, which I mentioned earlier, indiscriminately affected Windrush generation and descendants, people who came here in 1948 and onwards. But it originally started from 2007. So 2007 to present, 2023, is what the Home Office, or the period of the Home Office is specifically looking at when they're offering compensation and what's not. Ironically, the Windrush generation is from 1948 to 1988. That's a period of time where a lot of the Windrush generation came over. And so then my question was that, so how does that work? Because a lot of these people are not alive anymore and their children or grandchildren are here. How do they make a claim? Because that's what they're trying to rectify. The answer was that need to supply evidential burden to support a claim for that period. Okay. So their definition of the Windrush generation was taken from the time the people landed in 1948 UN to 1st of January 1989 or 31st of December 1988, whichever date you want to use. And people who came under the specific heads, be it before 1973 had settled status, before 1988 had settled status, or the different heads, there are the four heads a claim. That's how they target, or they define the Windrush quote unquote schemes. That's the period that they're looking at for that. And it coined the name Windrush because of the boat when it came in at Tilbury, as Garrick said, Windrush.
There's another point to be made here, I think, in relation, because what Ewan just said there. So the Windrush scheme is twofold. So is status and compensation. Those are the two bits. And you know, people have to fit into the settled status before a particular date. So we said January 1973 from a Commonwealth country. So either themselves, their parents, or their grandparents had to fit within that date. And then it also tells us that you can apply also if you come from any other country outside Commonwealth, but you must have settled status by the 1st of January 1989. Okay? So that's how the Home Office actually determine and look at your case. And if you fall outside of that, if it's if it's 1991, 1st of January 1991, they will say you're outside the scheme. Doesn't apply.
So I got your understanding, and I see how it makes sense. So this is where I have the problem, because from 1948 to 73, Commonwealth citizens, okay?
Yeah.
And we're talking a lot of countries, white countries and black countries. Then a person of any nationality up to 1988.
Hmm?
Why limit the Commonwealth to 73 and then anybody else up until 88, it doesn't make sense, because Commonwealth countries are also independent countries. They're
Well, it may make sense in a way that if you remember that most of the Commonwealth countries who gain independence, the citizens of those countries would have lost their British status, gaining independence.
right. They would have lost their status, but it still just doesn't make sense that a person of any nationality. So when you say a person of any nationality, this is where a lot of the European countries come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
they can continue up until 88. So let me just explain briefly.
Yeah.
I had an issue with a woman who came from Trinidad, moved to London in February 73. So the Home Office says she was outside the scheme because she arrived a month late after that. Now, she married a man here in London who was from St. Lucia, and he had right of abode at the time. Automatically, she gained it under the 1971 Act. A Commonwealth woman married to a man with right of abode, she gained it. And then they were stuck in Trinidad for 40 years almost until the scandal broke, about 36 years from 1983. And when we applied for her under the scheme, they refused her under the scheme and told her to apply outside of the scheme. Now, she is a person of any nationality, and right of abode is settled status. And I do get it that Trinidad is a Commonwealth country, but she had right of abode all the time. And also she was trapped in Trinidad because embassy staff didn't believe. So it's just crazy that this can happen, is the point I'm trying to make. And I don't
So
think
is it the case you're saying that they're not consistent? Are you saying that they're not consistent with how they apply the legislation?
The legislation, or I want to say the definition, because the legislation, there's no legislation about Windrush. The only legislation there is about Windrush is what was created in 2018 to allow the Home Office to process those applications for free.
Yeah.
They made amendments to the fee schedules. And nowhere else is there anything about Windrush in law. So Windrush is just something that the Home Office took a handle on at the outset of the scandal and gave it a definition to control it. And if you're going to say the scheme runs until 1988, a person of any nationality, well, Trinidad is any nationality. Barbados is any nationality. And there's no Commonwealth citizen is not defined as, there's no Commonwealth passport. There's no Commonwealth. It's just an idea.
Yeah, I understand your reasoning, and I think the way that they would sort of tackle this is the fact that any independent country from the Commonwealth gaining independence, which you're saying that they're from the rest of the world. So it's like, oh well, are you ex-Commonwealth or are you the rest of the world?
And still,
No, I'm saying, are you ex-Commonwealth or are you the rest of the world? But they will still classify you as ex-Commonwealth because you now gain independence. This is how I think they are sort of looking at it. Let me just bring in Raphael's point and see if there's any different thought. Raphael, please.
Hi, good morning. I just have a question. Well, my feeling is part of the just to go back to the start of the hostile environment. I just from my understanding, I don't think between 1948 and 1962 the environment was hostile.
No.
I think because it's the passing of the 1962 Act that started the removal of rights from the Commonwealth citizens.
Okay.
And then not just that, in the 1948 Act, Commonwealth citizens, just to speak to the other guy's point, there was no distinction between independent and non-independent nations. Commonwealth citizens refer to everyone. So these issues are very, very complex.
Yeah.
It's it's very easy to make general statements. I just in my understanding. So we really have to go back to the legislation and when the acts were passed and the period the passing of the acts, how it affected history.
Yeah.
And how it affected people's statuses. So yeah, that's just my point here. I mean, I have another question, but I'll bring that later.
But that's a
When
good point because Tanika and I, we've had a number of conversation, and in law, and we all know this, a barrister can interpret a piece of legislation in this way, another barrister can interpret it another way, and so forth. You get those interpretations. So we're using the same pieces of legislation that's out there in the public domain, whether that will be the 1971 or 73 Act, etc. That's a piece of legislation. It's the understanding of that, and that is clear. And what is very clear from what JCWI is actually telling us is really looking at the hostile environment from the standpoint of the impact on Windrush. And there is a date. We didn't understand there was a date. There was a starting point. And that starting point is with Theresa May as Home Secretary, a starting point. And why this is important, because there's another issue as to when you put a claim in to Windrush and you're trying to sort of, you may have suffered for 35 years, for example, right? You may have suffered for 35 years, but don't be thinking you will not get 35 years of compensation, because the Home Office will only go back to a period, a time, and that's it. You can't get anything beyond that. And so it may well be that this interpretation and understanding of hostile environment, they would say, oh, well, the hostile environment didn't start then, it started here. So in other words, we're cutting out 15 or 20 years out of your benefit, out of your impact as a result. And so the definition that is being used by the Home Office, it's important that we understand that, because there's no point putting in what has happened to us 30 years ago, because it was another issue. I'm going to make Tanika come back on this, about how do we, right, provide the evidence. So we said something has happened to us, over this period. How do we provide the evidence, and where do we get the evidence from in order to, to strengthen our case? And this is important because, if we took the example of the hostile environment before the 2012 and said, oh, it started much earlier, we might be thinking to ourselves that my claim, should work more than this, because my claim should go back, to a further time. But the Home Office will not accept that. And the difficulty is, how do you produce the evidence of 25 years ago, for example?
Yeah, Garrick, I'll just come in there.
Okay,
Just
yeah,
a quick point. And a lot of even I had to come to terms with this concept recently. Again, just like everyone here, I'm still learning. I think I know, but then I realize I don't know. And I was saying to Garrick today, the more I learn is the more I realize I do not know. With Garrick saying that if you've had 35 years of harm, or you suffered 35 years because you could not prove your ability to say, well, you could not prove your legal status to be in the UK, and you could not get employment, and you were earning, say, for example, 25,000 a year. So that's 25 times 35. That's not what the Home Office is going to compensate you.
No.
It's a compensation scheme, not a restitution scheme. Restitution is to put you in the position you would have been in had the harm not happened, or I did not cause the harm to you, which would be the 35 years that they caused you of being unable to work because you couldn't prove your status and you've been struggling for that period of time. However, they're just compensating you for something that has happened to you, and they determine what period of time they'll compensate you. Because one of the questions they may turn and ask, Okay, over that 35 years, what did you do to try to rectify your situation? Did you try to get work? Where? And you have to evidence it. Um, I'm not going to speak much about that point. I don't want to go on a different tangent to where Garrick wants me to go. He wants me to tell you about evidence. Now, as I was saying earlier, with first my understanding being that the hostile environment started in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and prior from 1948 onwards. One of the questions I wrote to the Home Office and asked, because our clients were struggling to produce evidence to support their claims, where do we get it from? How do we get it? Because you have to prove what you're saying. You cannot just say, oh, I was affected. This is how I was affected, but you have no evidence to support what you said. Their records only go back to 1985. Then they direct you to the National Archives. The National Archives primarily record naturalization, the date you were naturalized. It does not record when you would have landed in a country, if you had still a status or not, when you would have been able to, as a CUKC citizen, which is citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, or if your country had gained independence and you would have reverted back to your origin, your country of birth nationality, or even if you were born in the UK around that time, but your parents were from the Commonwealth or a different country, you would revert to your parents' country nationality if you were not born to a male before 1988. I think you and might correct me on that. Before 1988 or 83, one of the 2 years. 83. Thank you. You're making me do some some digging in the memory bank. If you were not born to a male who had right of abode, British citizenship, then you would have reverted to whatever nationality your parents had, i.e. Commonwealth country, even though you were born in the UK. You would have had to wait a period of 10 years or in your 10th birthday to register as British. And that's all immigration law. The point is that it's not straightforward and simple. And I think Roland mentioned that in the chat. He stated that, I'm looking for his comment. He stated with regards to country that it says from any country. It does not say any country except Commonwealth country. To interpret it any other way is narrowing the scope of the scheme. He's referring to the Windrush schemes. I read out Roland's comment because we were having difficulties getting him on the mic.
Exactly my point.
Which was your point, Ewan? I'll come back to you in a second, Ewan. But also, I would like to invite Neil to come on the mic. The
Yes,
reason
Neil
why
has
I
just
invite
put
Neil to
something
come on the mic.
in. Yeah, Neil has just put something in which is quite interesting. In the
Yes, he
chat.
put several things, and I would like him to speak to it rather than because
Yes.
it's really interesting, and I don't want to give thumbs up or love your comments.
Absolutely.
So,
That's
Ewan,
fine.
what were you saying?
I was just saying it is exactly my point that it says a person of any nationality, and so you can't limit it to Commonwealth citizens because that's just strange. They are of any nationality, and why would you limit them but allow other people to go up to 88? I don't understand the reasoning for that.
I think if I may attempt to answer that, I think it's not interpreted correctly. When they say any nationality, it would have mean once you gain your independence or you no longer part of the CUKC, you don't become another country. So you're no longer under the umbrella of citizens of the United Kingdom colonies. You're not outside of that.
So the Trinidadian was
we
a
just
person
lost
of
a
any
little bit of
nationality.
your audio there, Tanika.
Oh, sorry. Can you
Just
hear me
repeat
now?
what you just said. Yeah, can hear you.
Okay, so sorry, Ewan. I'll just repeat what I said. 1 second, Neil. We'll come to you. Ewan, as I was saying, my interpretation is because the laws changed in 1973 because a lot of the citizens of the United Kingdom and countries, Commonwealth countries, they started gaining independence from late 1950s to 1960s into 1970s. And the UK government, according to legislation, was like, okay, you don't want to be no longer a colonial country, then you're another country, therefore you're independent. We're going to change our legislation to reflect said. And you would not be entitled to the benefits that you would have had you been a CUKC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're under the umbrella of CUKC, then you're going to be part of, quote unquote, the Commonwealth at the time. You now become another country what is outside of the colony. So therefore, you're any other country. People from the same CUKCs who came here after, for example, Guyana. I'm from Guyana. and we get independence 1966. People from Guyana who came in 1976 or whatever, they can still claim right of abode once they've served the 5 years, because they're just another country, any country then. So do look at it within the meaning of that, because also don't forget EU, the UK joined the EU in 1973. So they also had to include provisions for that treaty at the time, because countries in Europe now became part of it was the Iron Age. I can't remember. I'm not going to go into the European, but the reason why they joined the treaty so that they can get free movements and the goods and da. So that is another reason why probably the term any other country probably is used. But you have to read the law and the sections in context to have get a broader meaning.
But just
I
before
think that's also what Roland was
leave
saying.
that point, Tanika, just before you leave that point, and before I bring Neil in, the point we're trying to establish here is, how the Home Office will actually process your application, and how many years, of impact, are you able to evidence. And this is the point that Tanika started off, about the evidence. It's no point telling us something 25 years ago we can't evidence. How do we evidence our impact and our claim? And so the Home Office is literally, controlling the length of time, right, that that they will calculate our payment, etc.
Yes.
I'd
And
like to bring
yes.
Neil in now, because Neil might cross, might come back to a couple of points. Neil, can you come in now, please?
Hi, Garrett. Hi,
Hello.
everyone. Yeah, there's an interesting debate going on this afternoon, and I'm just raising a few points of interest. Firstly, looking at the evidence of what is coming across does not actually fully add up as to how things really happened in those years up until January 1973. Now, what is evident is that, yes, we do understand that a number of nations did transition from colonial nations to post-colonial nations, and that this transition happened over a period of time from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s onwards, 80s onwards. And so there are different transition points in different colonial nations that brought them into the British family of Commonwealth nations. Now, what I understand, and from my notes, I understand that the British Commonwealth were also protected up until as was convenient for the Home Office. It came to a point where, after the 1973, January 1973, or the 1970 Immigration Act, this was watered down and brought into a situation where, from that point onwards, Commonwealth citizens were not as protected as were with pre-1971 Immigration Act. Now, I also know that it takes two sides to maintain evidence. It cannot be that, now we understand the onus of responsibilities for the claimant to put the evidence in, but that does not give the justification for the Home Office to lose its evidence that is also responsible towards maintaining the records. So the records have to be accessible for us to provide the evidence. Now, the evidence has been destroyed, or whatever has happened to it has just disappeared or something, then it makes it harder for us to access that evidence and provide that evidence. So we are at a lost cause, because the evidence can only be maintained if it can be accessed. And if the evidence was never provided to citizens of CUKC and Commonwealth citizens, they were never given any papers. So how can you prove evidence when the papers were not given, other than entry and departure stamps on passports?
So how do you prove a negative?
How do you prove a negative? Because there was no paperwork. When I look at my father's situation, my father's case, he had no immigration papers at all. All that we can see that was provided was entry and departure stamps between 69. He traveled in 75, 76, 77. There was no indefinite leave to enter on his passport up until 1977. And so this issue about the indefinite leave to enter being triggered from 1962-68 into 71 Immigration Act doesn't hold true, because it does not exist on Commonwealth passports. So there's an anomaly going on here that doesn't make sense. And what I'm
I
trying to
think-
suggest here is the evidence has to be accessible. If the evidence was never provided in the first place, then how can it be brought to the attention of the Home Office?
That's a good point. That's a good point, Neil.
I think I could help with that though.
One moment. Just stick with this point about the evidence. So Neil has raised a good point, because if it wasn't there, how can you get something that wasn't written down, etc. There's another point in relation to the compensation and calculation, and Tanika started off by, I think she were referring to, if you had worked at a company, let's say in 1975 and 76, and the company, I'm going to use the example now, the company is no longer in existence, so they can't be traced, right? So that company doesn't exist. And this point about, okay, so you're now, the claimant is now saying that, they were impacted as a result of not able to work. And they now have to show that, well, they were looking for a job. My last job was on this date, and since then I've not been able to get work, employment. And you're not able just to say that, because you have to have some evidence. You can say that in your statement, but come on, produce something. What we understand from having this conversation with the independent advisor is that records, and let's talk about in law, you're only allowed to keep records for a fixed period of time and then destroy. Okay? I think it's something like 8 years, or I can't remember the exact figure. Even local authority keeping records, they can only go back to a fixed period of time. So they will not have records 25 years ago or 20 years ago. And the point that Tanika made about, going to the archive will not give you what you want. Yeah. Let's just re-emphasize it. The reason for going to the archive is not to get the evidence of the company that went bust or whatever. It will not give you that. The archive is very specific in terms of what it can give you, and I just want to emphasize it. So Tanika, can you just say what the archives can give the claimant?
My understanding of what the archives provides is the date that you registered your naturalization certificate number, i.e., if you were part of the CUKC or a Commonwealth country or any other country, you came here, you had settled status for a period of 5 years, then you choose to naturalize to become a British citizen, you get a registration certificate after you swear an oath to the Queen, now King. And that number in that time is what it get registered. So you can see when you became naturalized, when you became a citizen of the United Kingdom. That is my understanding.
And that is also my understanding. So when we're looking for other evidence, right, other evidence to demonstrate the impact, what's happened to us, the archive is not able to help us. We have to find that other evidence from elsewhere. And from elsewhere, as I said, in terms of local authority, in terms of dates, you do not, there is no record going back 20 years. However, what was also said in the conversation with the independent advisor, particularly around employment, that an individual would have paid national insurance and income tax. Yes. And so we would then expect a record with the HMCI, whatever the title was, expect that information. Because if you worked, even if it was for 5 years or over a short period, right, tax was collected, insurance was collected, evidence that would be with government organization. So I don't think there is a limit to how long that is kept. Is that correct, Tanika? There is no.
That was my understanding from what he said. He said the records go to like 100 or 200 years. I'm not sure whether it's the NHS or the tax office, which is HMRC.
Yeah. So it's good for claimant to know this. Yeah. What's important? So you've been impacted as a result of not able to prove your status. And if, the last time you work, for example, say it was 1973, and you haven't worked since, there will be records of the last tax and insurance that's been collected for you. The evidence will be there. Okay? And if you haven't worked since then, right, it will always say that, nothing has been collected because you've not worked. See? So, we need to think about, how we approach this whole idea of the impact and what we have suffered. And there are things that we cannot evidence, in which case, you don't expect the Home Office to actually say yes to that, because they probably use a discretion and think, well, I'm sorry, it's not, we don't believe that, and there's nothing you can do to evidence that. But where you can, within government organization, right, it does exist. Yeah, it does exist. Your dates of birth, your national insurance number will give a lot of information about the individual and what has happened to that individual.
I would like to bring in you, and you were going to make a point, Rafa. I see your hand is up, so we'll come back to you. Roland, I don't know if you now have audio. Please put your hand up if you do.
Yes, he did. I saw his audio move before, so we'll come back to Roland in a moment. So let's just take those 2 points.
Yeah, just briefly. So you said, and you're right. Tax records is said to be the most efficient in any country you go to because the government wants their money. The part about what you just mentioned, if a person hadn't worked since 1975, and it is the fault of, the Home Office not believing them, whatever. It is virtually impossible for them to evidence that they were trying to find work, and the government knows this. They always put the victims in a position of trying to prove a negative, and it's impossible to do. So how do people fear and get a good result in those circumstances of having to prove that the unprovable, that they were looking for work?
Good point. Yes. And this is one of the challenge that we have, being asked to produce things that they know is impossible to produce. But that's one of the way of not processing or giving the individual what they may are entitled to. And there's nothing we can do about that. Again, the other thing that this might be helpful also, the conversation we had surrounding this issue around employment and company going bust and so forth and so forth. And again, if four people had worked for this company, and the other 3 individual who worked at this engineering firm or whatever in Birmingham or what time, again, their testimony, if all 4 people could say, I worked here and the company went bust in this day, again, it's not just you actually saying it. You've got other people now, helping you.
If they're alive.
If they're alive, yes, of course. Yeah.
Or the descendants could do it on their behalf.
Precisely. So it's always worth, trying to collaborate other people's story. And if they almost
or witness statements.
A statement. If they almost say, okay, well, 4 or 5 people have said they've worked at this place, during this period, etc. It's more likely that they will accept that than just the one individual is just saying, well, that's where I work, and they're no longer in existence, because then it's it's your word. As I think that was the expression used, Tanika. It's your word against theirs. It's like
exactly. Okay. Yeah. And there's something I would like to add, and I think Garrick, we need to probably start pushing this out a bit more. There is something that we can do. And we have an affiliate or a strategic partner that works with law, and he is able to advocate for the unclaimant's behalf, providing that the scheme, let me go back a little. The scheme provides that the Home Office has discretionary powers as Garrick said, how can you prove a negative? I think you and Neil said that again, and I agree with you guys, because that's the battle we are up against. How do you prove a negative? Now, the Home Office has discretionary powers to say, well, okay, on the balance of probability, which is a standard of proof they're using, this could have happened or this has happened. Now, if you provide all the evidence that is required, that you can attain, and you have a strong case put forward by your advocates or yourself, and they still refuse or deny either your status rectification claim or heads of compensation, even though you evidence it, our affiliate said that if he can prove that on the basis of rationality, that the Home Office failed to apply discretion, for example, or they erred in their decision, i.e., they didn't take all the evidence into consideration, or they falter in some other way, then he's prepared to advocate on your behalf, one, for legal aid in order to take your matter to court. And the purpose of the courts is to interpret legislation, to interpret what Parliament intended. So basically, did the Home Office interpret Section 1, subsection 2 or 5, or whichever part of the section correctly or not? Did they take the evidence that was presented into them into consideration, and did they apply the section correctly to the evidence? Did they apply the discretionary power that is given to them under the Act or not? Whether that leads to just a small claims case, for example, or it leads to judicial review, because more than likely it does it only way you can challenge it to judicial review. And there are there's certain heads under judicial review that you have to bring it under. So, for example, the Home Office, the minister did not use the power that she had correctly, or she failed to use it, or she abused, the power had been abused, or whatever the head that this person thinks it could be brought under, he can take it to court on your behalf. So that's something we've recently established with law. So we do invite you to come and have a conversation with us. And if it's something that we can push forward.
This is quite important, if I can interject. This is quite
Yes.
important because there are some complicated cases. And sometimes people just think it's no point bothering with this. Yeah. We've had conversation with the barrister around these issues, and the issue has always been, legislation on interpretation. And if it is the case that legislation wasn't properly applied, or it was applied in the wrong way, that is the green light, for this law firm to say, okay, we're happy to take this, and because we think, we think some, they didn't do what they should have done, and we think we can challenge them. It's always good to do that, because sometimes that may open the door for similar cases, if it has gone through the courts, and we get a judgment from it. The other thing that is important, that we always mention: don't try to do things in isolation. It's always good for other people to know. And there may well be the case where you're sharing information, and by sharing information you get a better understanding of how you might present your case, and so forth. It is always a good thing, and we emphasize this both on this platform and on the Sunday Chat platform. When you are about to submit a claim, draft it first, get somebody to have a look at it. That may well be another person, or it may well be an independent advocate to have a look at it. Because even the words and the language that we use in describing our situation will make a difference in that application. And we know it has been the case where individual have submitted a claim based, just fill it in, and it the Home Office didn't approve anything. But when it was reviewed, then something came out of it. So we always emphasize this point. Please don't just submit a claim. Get somebody to have a look at it, and in particular, those people who might have a little bit more knowledge about it, or people who've been successful in assisting another person. It's always a good thing to get a second and third eye on our application.
Can I bring Rafa in, Garrett? He's
Please,
had his
yeah.
hand up. I saw Roland had his hand up too, but I
Yeah,
think he's
yeah.
disappeared.
Yeah, Rafa and Roland, please. Yeah.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to raise something about these when Neil was discussing the stamps and the passport. Just to say, it is my understanding that the stamps and the passport, even though they don't say indefinite leave to enter, are very important. So the square stamp, as I understand it, without an annotation, is proof that you have been allowed to enter the country without a leave restriction.
Mhm.
So if you do have the passport and you do, and there is a square stamp in it, that is what they used to call an open stamp, is the equivalent to a grant of indefinite leave.
All right.
So that is one source of proof. And I mean, secondly, I was also wants to add that I was able to get my father's NIS records, even though he left the UK in 1965. So, well, I was able to get his number at least.
Yeah.
So that is also a second source of proof. So while, as I guess kind of came out later in the conversation, while we may not be able to get the work records, there is evidence based on NIS or tax records that you may be able to access to help you with your claim.
Yeah. Yes. That's a point. And when we talk about the stamp in passport, I haven't got all the knowledge about this, but I do know, and Tanika, you might correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of us who had stamp in our passport, and some people had indefinite leave to remain in another passport, and then that passport expired. What happens then?
They refused to transfer it over, I believe, at the time, or
Yeah.
you would have had to walk with both passports and then you would have lost it.
Yeah.
Now it's not the case because you can walk with both or whatever the case may be. They don't transfer it over, but at the time, I believe you lost it once the passport expired.
I was just asking the question, if the passport expired, out of date, the indefinite leave is in the passport, but it's out of date. Is that applicable?
I don't
Just
know. I don't want to
oh.
speculate. I want to say no, but I don't know. So I'll say I don't know.
Applicable how? I'm trying to understand the
Valid.
concept.
Well,
Applicable, valid.
valid. Is it valid? Because
It
I'll give you an example. So
would
let
be.
me just use my own situation. So I have a Jamaican passport. I have a multiple entry to United States in that passport. That passport has expired. In my new passport, British passport, I haven't got that. If I need to, to go to the United States, I'll probably have to get a visa waiver or something. The point I was trying to make, whatever is written in our passport, if that passport is out of date, it means whatever is in that passport is no longer applicable. That's the question I'm asking.
I just want to add, I don't think so. I don't think that's how it works. It depends on the law.
Right.
So it's a relay. So
Yeah.
so if you had indefinite leave to remain in 1973, and then you returned in 1974, you present your indefinite leave to remain. You didn't leave the common travel area for more than 2 years, then the relay continues.
Yes,
so then you should have been
I
presented.
understand that, Rafi. I mean, it is the case that the 2 year and 1 day out the country would work against you, because then you've lost your right to return. And what you're saying, if you return within the period.
What I'm saying is that the stamp in the passport would be used, the date on the stamp of the indefinite leave to remain in the old passport would be used to show when last you left, or
Yeah.
when you gain that, and then that will be used to be transferred to the next passport. That's at least how I understand it. I may be wrong on that.
Well, it's a question that we will seek clarification on this point, because we know a lot of cases where indefinite leave in a passport have expired and it's gone, and we know cases where the 2 years have gone and they've lost it. So I will try to get an answer to that, but that's an interesting point.
My understanding is that ILR only lapses if you stay outside the country for 2 years or more, or they find a reason to take it away from you, i.e. criminal activity. Other than that, even if the passport is expired, the status itself that you have, that you applied for, or that was given to you if you were in the country before 73 is still valid.
Right.
So
Okay.
I just want to add to that as well, because the status is not something in your passport, it's something given to you in law.
Mm.
You have to reference the law.
Mm.
And I just want to add as well that it's not just if you stay outside of the country for more than 2 years.
Mhm.
It's leaving the common travel area before 2000. If you
Mhm.
left the common travel area before the year 2000, it lapsed as soon as you left, which is a different from being outside of the country for more than 2 years, which is the current law.
Right.
You
Okay.
said as soon as
Garrett,
you
we
left.
have 11 minutes left. One
Yeah.
second.
I wanted Roland,
UN.
because Roland audio went up a couple of times. I wanted to bring Roland in before we move.
Yes, Roland, if you can hear us, please join. Neil put a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to read it out, Garrett, and maybe we can invite comments on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just have a look.
Or I'll read it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Neil's question was it standard practice? One second. Okay. Was it standard practice for one spouse to have no ILE or ILR stamp till 1977, but another spouse had an ILE stamp soon after 1977?
Right. But the passport gave the status, but the passport proved the status, right?
That was based on the conversation about the ILE ILR stamp between Rafa and UN.
Yeah.
So the question is,
I wonder how we can test this. Tanika, how we can actually test this out. Have you had any cases where an individual has come to you with LER stamped in their passport, and then the Home Office have challenged that, that their status is not, they haven't got settled status. Have you had any case like that?
no, I've had cases where the person's ILE would have lapsed.
Right.
But my knowledge,
once it lapsed, then it's very hard to get it back, isn't it?
yes, and they will have to apply as a returning resident.
Yes,
but
that is
just
the case with a lot of Windrush people.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but just on a general note, to Neil's point. So my interpretation based on that, just hypothetically, if a married couple comes over or a husband comes over before a wife, the husband had ILE or ILR stamp in a passport, the wife doesn't necessarily automatically get it unless they've been here maybe 2 or 3 years, depending if they're in the armed forces. At least that's a legislation now. What it was back then, I don't know. But normally it's after like 5 years. But if you're in the military, it's 2 to 3 years. You can get it if the husband has settled status or is a citizen. So I'm not 100% sure on Neil's question how to best answer it.
I could just add a little bit to that. So husbands, wives, and children under 16 were entitled to automatic ILE before the repeal of the Section 15 in 1988. So that is a transition that's carried over from the 1962 Act.
Right.
But before 1973, there was nothing like ILE or ILR.
Right.
So people with
indefinite.
passports in 1969 would not have anything like ILE or LIR stamped in their passports.
Right. Right. Okay, I get that. Roland, are you there? Can I just bring you into the conversation, please? We only got about 8 or 9 minutes left.
Whilst we wait for Roland, can I ask the audience if there's anything that you guys would like us to cover, or for the next session, which is in 2 weeks, any suggestions?
I have one thing, please. Sorry to be such a hog. Section 34 of the of the 1971 Act.
Section 34.
Yes.
Yeah, please. I mentioned it to Garrick Raffer earlier today. And as our discussion went on, but for the benefit of the audience, please do speak a little on it while we wait for Roland.
Yeah.
Raffer?
Sure. So it's my understanding that anyone that entered the country between 1962 and 1973 and received an express grant of leave, which would be the square stamp in your passport with no time limitation on it.
Yeah.
They would have gained, on the passing of the 1973 Act, indefinite leave to enter. Now, that leave, based on the language of the Section 34, only expired when you exited the common travel area. So there are people like my father who would have been outside of the country and didn't return until 1988. And it is my understanding that leave, that grant of leave in 1973, remained a grant until he entered the country and left the common travel area in 1988, but was never acknowledged as a grant because people didn't understand the Section 34 of the 1973 Act existed. Yeah. And I think people still don't understand that. So I think it's a good section for a lot of people to look at in the 1973 Act.
Yeah.
73 or 71?
73, sorry. 71 that was enacted in 73.
Yeah. 73 was the implementation of the act. So 71 Act, but didn't come in force until
71 Act, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Raffer. The reason, go ahead. Unless you're, if you're not finished, please continue, Raffer.
That's just a quick summary. This is a quick summary, and like anybody with knowledge of that section, if they can provide their opinion or.
Okay, thank you for that, Raffer. Ewan, have you come across that section before? Section 34?
No, not specifically in terms of remembering it. But I know the act from top to bottom, but I don't know about the ILE part. Can't advise on it.
Okay, so Rafa brought this to my attention before, and I'm just trying to get it up in the few minutes we have left so I can read from it and then give you my interpretation. But the long and short of it, what I gathered from it is that the Home Office is using Section 1, subsection
Section 5.
Yeah, whereas this fundamentally lends itself to interpretation, as we were speaking about earlier. Rafa interprets Section 34 to be beneficial to his claim, whereas the Home Office doesn't agree with it. I'm just loading it up. Section
1, subsection 5. I know it from the top of my head.
Okay, no, Section 34.
Oh, 34. Okay.
Section 34 and 34.3 specifically.
It says repeal, transitional, and temporary. Sorry, what did you say, Rafa? Section 34, subsection 3?
Section 34 talks about being out of the country, and the act is targeting entrance before and after the date. But Section 34.3 is where the express grant is given of ILE.
You see, this is why interpretation is so important. I've got it in front of me.
I have
That's
the immigration 7 to 1.
Um,
Okay.
and it's also mentioned in the that section is mentioned in the 2016 Act. You know, the Immigration Act 1971 is amended as follows. You got section 3.1 that deals with power to grant leave to enter or remain United Kingdom subject to condition restricting employment, occupation, subsidized work. Then 3, after section 24A, they inserted illegal working. Then you have 1, 2, 3. There's a whole, I think this, reading this, you will not get the understanding until you understand the case law that surround this.
Garrett or
Yeah, I don't think
Rafa.
you're reading it right.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to confirm. I have the right thing in front of me.
Have I got the right one?
No, it doesn't seem so.
Okay, Rafa, can you tell me if I have the right one then?
Sure, tell me.
So it did section charter 4 reads repeal transitional and temporary.
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead, read the rest.
Okay, and subsection 3 of section charter 4 reads a person treated in accordance with subsection 2 above as having leave to enter the United Kingdom. A?
Yeah, that's the right one, yeah.
Okay, so A, I'll read for the benefit of everyone else. A, shall be treated as having an indefinite leave if he is not at the coming into force of this act, subject to a condition limiting his stay in the United Kingdom. And B, shall be treated if he is then subject to such a condition as having a limited leave of such duration and subject to conditions capable of being attached to leave under this act as correspond to the conditions to which he is then subject, but not to conditions not capable of being so attached. So Rafa, according to, yeah.
The first part is applying to Rafa, I think.
Exactly, 33A. And I do not think that at the time when that came in 1988, according to that Rafa, now reading it with more understanding, he was subject to limitations, i.e., Trinidad had gained their independence. So therefore,
no, it has nothing to do with that. So he was granted that act in 34A granted him ILE, but up until 1988, on the 30th of July, Commonwealth citizens were guaranteed the same rights that they had prior to before the act, because the 1973 Act 1.5 allowed Commonwealth citizens to maintain whatever status they had in the previous act. But that isn't even the point. The point is that once he had acquired, once the act had given him that that ILE, the only way it would expire is when he left the country. And he didn't leave the country, because having been outside the country, until 1988. And so these things, it's also been acknowledged. So if you look at recently there was not recently, in
Rafa,
like March.
can I just pause you there
Sure,
for a minute, please? Garrick,
Yeah,
it's
sure.
17:01, so we're over time. So
Yeah.
Rafa, what I would propose is that we take that up in the next session.
We're going to take that up because we need to do some further work on that.
There's some reading to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to do now, because we've just reached the 5 o'clock, and we've had a really good conversation around a number of different issues. And again, for the next session, we certainly want very specific question, posts in advance. It will help us to have those questions in advance. If not, then we will deal with what we get on the call. But just for this session, I hope it's been beneficial, because we're trying to focus on very specific question relating to specific pieces of legislation, and we hope these conversations will benefit the individual, and help the individual to sort of understand the different pieces of legislation that has impacted on Windrush. So this is a good start that we've made today, and we will continue again. So this is fortnightly. You notice all the dates are on our Eventbrite page. And can I just check, was it okay for people registering and getting on to the Zoom? Was there any issues?
I didn't have any issue.
No issues. Because we need to know that that everything is okay.
No issues
So
for
that we
me.
can correct anything, because it's
Thank
new for us as well. So
Yes.
we're also learning too.
Roland has volume. He was on and off as a speaker. I don't know if he
Yeah.
wants to come in.
Yeah. So Roland, if you just come in now, because we're right at the conclusion. If there's anything you'd like to say before we conclude, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Roland, before you continue, can you also mention next week? Invite people to next week?
Yeah, next Sunday.
Yes.
Second
you.
Sunday of the month, we Windrush Compensation Scheme Sunday chat, which we host second and last Sunday of each month. With next Sunday being the second, we'll be hosting it 2 to 4 p.m. We will circulate. I've got your connect. A couple of people in here have not got their details. So Garrick and Tanika, if you've got their details,
yeah.
Once you've gotten it, the link, share it, please. There's one thing, quick question I wanted to ask anyway. And this is a benefit for mainly Tanika and Tyler. I'm gonna pose it to Neil. If you're outside the UK, Neil, as a close family member, can you make an application to the scheme?
Sorry, did you say Neil or me?
Neil.
Okay.
It's a good reason why I'm asking Neil. I'm asking Neil a question to make a point.
Yes.
Can you?
So this is a point that was raised, that if whether the Windrush scheme is not explicit in its explanation as to whether Windrush claimants from overseas Windrush citizens who are abroad, first of all, if they have been impacted by a primary claimant who was within the United Kingdom and was impacted by Windrush, why or what is the status of their compensation claim as a close family member to a primary claimant who has been awarded an award, but the close family member who is stuck in India, exiled in India, was unable to claim on the primary against the primary claimant who was awarded. What is the status of that?
Quick question, Neil, again. What is your understanding? Can they make a claim from outside the UK? If you're a close
there's nothing in the Windrush information that says they can't. But once the application is submitted, further information comes to light as to saying that it's not possible. But the information is not clear on the onset whether they can or can't. It's not made clear. As far as information that is disseminated, it explains that overseas Windrush citizens are entitled to the same claims as primary and close family members as a Windrush citizen who is within the United Kingdom. So there's no clarity on that with the paperwork that has been disseminated for Windrush overseas citizens. It is very unclear as to how they can tell you once application is submitted a different story, when that is not what is made clear when the paperwork is showing that Windrush overseas citizens are entitled to the same compensation status claims as a Windrush citizen who is within the United Kingdom. It is not clear to me.
Are you saying, Neil, that the guidance needs to be looked at because
yes, but it needs to be looked at positively, not negatively. There's no point. There's no point looking in the guidance notes. What has been stated is that they have equal status and rights as a Windrush citizen within the United Kingdom. So that is not being applied. That is of concern.
Okay.
Neil, can I come at you quickly? Are you saying that it's stating there that they've got equal status? Were they outside out?
I have read no evidence to suggest that Windrush overseas citizens are any less entitled to the Windrush scheme than a Windrush citizen in the United Kingdom. I've not read any information to contradict that.
I have. It says this on page 49. I.e., if you're outside the UK, you cannot make claim for. The only claim you only edge of claim you can apply for is impact on life.
Yeah, we've done that on our chat several times. Yeah.
Roland, do you have a link to it that you can put in the chat so Neil can click on
It
and
is in the guidance note, Tanika.
The
Yeah.
page
caseworker guidance.
49?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying that, I say that for a reason, because I know I heard Professor Livermore has been referenced a number of times.
Mm.
Okay. It's on page 49, Neil, in the caseworker guidance, 103-page document.
Yeah, that's the big document. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are Windrush overseas citizens entitled to as far as the schemes are concerned? If some
Impact
clarity
on
could be brought to
Impact
that.
on life, and impact on life only.
As a primary or second, primary or close family member.
Doesn't matter. That's what it says there.
Only impact.
Uh-huh.
If
But-
you're out, primary claimant, as far as I understand it, and you probably can correct that or elaborate on this. As far as I understand it, if you're outside the UK as a close family member, you cannot make a claim unless you were in the UK when the impact or the individual was going through the hostile environment, so to speak.
There's a concern about that. I'm just raising one small concern about that,
Yeah.
because the very reason why the primary claimant was impacted was it's all connected, because the close family member and the primary member have the same rights, but that's okay. They came under the same. The primary claimant was the son of the close family member.
Yeah, but if you're
the
outside the
cases were-
UK, you cannot make a
Absolutely, but
claim.
the
That's the
point of
difference.
argument being raised is that they were not meant to be outside the UK. They were denied re-entry. So the fact that they were outside was not by choice. That is a point that has not been resolved.
right.
What?
Yeah.
That was the same argument. That was the same argument for people like the guy who was on the front, the boxer. He
Yes.
was left in Jamaica, and then he came back and he couldn't register because he was outside the UK for a specific amount of time. But although that was still the fault of the Home Office and the Home Secretary,
Exactly.
they still had to go and change the law to give discretion to that. So I don't know. It's really, it needs to be
Well,
raised
that's the other one of the purposes of us doing this, just for everybody's benefit who may not know, is so that we can pick up issues within the scheme. So we, Roland, Garrick, and myself, we've started with others to collate issues, barriers, limitations, and put them as recommendations with the help of the independent advisor to the Windrush scheme for the Home Office, so that we can recommend that, okay, these things need to be made clearer. Like Neil said, definition and guidance need to be clearer. And don't forget, some of these things, like for example, overseas secondary claimants could have made more claims in the earlier stages, but then they've started to limit the schemes and narrow it down now to where it is now. And even soon, they might even change things again.
What's a secondary claimant? Sorry, Tanika, go ahead.
So what may be accurate today, based on our conversation and our knowledge as a collective, may become obsolete tomorrow. So that's another reason why we're doing this, so that we can stay up to date and get rid of all the disinformation that's out there and myths.
What's
So
a
we can
secondary
help.
claim?
Yeah, go ahead, Roland.
What is a secondary claim?
A secondary claim is somebody who claims on behalf of the primary claimant that they would have witnessed. Go ahead. Like, say, for example, you're a primary claimant. You were affected by the Windrush scandal, i.e., you were denied work because you did not have your Jamaican passport to prove that you had a right to be here, i.e., a valid passport to say, well, I'm a Jamaican national, I have ILE or right of abode or whatever. If you were a child or wanting to go to school, me as your wife, I then saw the struggles you went through trying to get employment, the nights that you cried yourself to sleep, your inability to provide food for the family. I saw the psychological. Sorry?
Are we talking a close family member claim?
Secondary claimant. I'm the secondary claimant.
Hold on. Are we saying, is that a close? We got a primary claimant, yeah?
Yeah.
We've got the deceased estate, and we've got the close family member.
Which is a secondary claimant.
That's the same thing. Yeah.
So the close, we're talking a close family member claim away, yeah?
Yeah, the secondary claimant, which is what I was giving the example that I'm your wife, got here, and you can prove that you had a right to be here. You didn't have to have a British passport to prove your right.
I understand that. The reason why I say that specifically to be specific on terminology, because that terminology I've not seen it in the
Yeah, you're
I
right.
think it's used interchangeably, quite loosely.
No, it shouldn't, because
I know it shouldn't, but I'm just saying what it is, and that's my interpretation.
I know it's coming from, and it shouldn't be used. If it's not in the
Yes.
guidance, if it's not in the guidance, though, I know it's coming from it. It's not really you I'm criticizing, Tanika. And it's coming from the same place that give the impression that close family member claims can be made outside the UK.
Well, listen.
That's not the case. The reason I asked Neil,
one second.
It's not what Neil is experiencing.
Yeah, we can pick up some of this in the next Sunday chat, because we've gone over time, and I don't want to keep anybody beyond. It's now 12 minutes past, but certainly our next Sunday chat, which focus on deceased estate, primary claimant, and close family members. These conversation, we can carry these conversation into that session in the next
which
week.
is the 8th of October, which is different to this forum.
That's
this
right.
forum is a Q&A chat, questions and answers. Next week, which is every second and last Sunday, is where, as Garrick just explained, the primary, close family, and deceased estate claimants are explained and go forward into detail. Here, which our next forum is on the 15th of October, we will go over the questions that we Rafa had started to bring up, going to more in the secondary claimants with Roland and Neil. If you guys can join us again, and we'll explore for the questions that are submitted, or if not, we will come up with some of the things that I personally have found to be limitations or barriers. And maybe you can help me understand where I may be lacking, and vice versa.
No, that's good. So can I just say thank you very much for joining the call today, and I hope it's been useful. Please talk to other people about this the same way you talk to other people about the Sunday chat and about the Rally of Parliament. So we have must share this information across not just in the UK, but talk to people from outside the UK so that they can come and join the Zoom call as well and get more information on the Windrush scheme and status. So can I thank you, Tanika, for today, and for those who participated and provide us with some question. It's been a very informative session, and I hope that we will continue to discuss these issues as we move forward. As I said, just finally, the Liverpool Advocates for Windrush is not restricted to cases from Liverpool. We are open to cases wherever they come from. So please don't think because we're based in Liverpool, it's just for Liverpool residents. There is a reason for the Liverpool energy and focus. We're doing some work in Liverpool, but the advocates are covering claims regardless of where they are. So please remember that. So thank you very much, and I look forward to see you next week in the Sunday chat, and then the week after with our question. So enjoy.
Thank you very much again. Thank you,
Gareth.
Sunday
lunch, and I'm going to go in the kitchen now and just finish off my food. Okay.
Enjoy.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye everyone.